how many people are in 10 years into a marriage saying things like, I just don't even think I want this anymore. I don't want to spend time.
Yeah, marriage is just you just exist.
Hmm.
We're just here together, eating together, and that's it.
I mean, how many of those cases have you personally seen?
I've seen a lot. I mean, I've seen couples come in where basically there's no passion, there's no emotion, and they're just kind of going through the motions of their life.
Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years. My name is Pi.
I'm Dr. Glenn.
Today, we are talking about what does a healthy relationship look like.
That's a good topic.
You're like, I don't know.
I don't know. Why are they tuning in? Why are they asking us?
We finished the last episode and we asked Anthony, like, what'd you think? And usually Anthony is we rely on Anthony to be our critic. He's like, it was good. I liked it. What'd you say afterwards?
That made me feel good. That made me feel good. Thank you for the validation, Anthony.
Made me feel better.
Yes.
Okay, so before we dive into this topic, our business partner Chris wants us to make sure that we mention what it is that we actually do. So we have developed a framework for coaching based around the topic of what does a healthy relationship look like. This was my research project over the past 5 years to answer that question, and I went through 500 case studies. And what you and I developed over this past year is now an actual model of therapy called core value focused therapy, where we can guide individuals and couples through not only answering that question, but in 12 weeks time, they're going to make dramatic improvements to the relationship. They're going to understand how to self-diagnose. They're going to become their own relationship experts.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're using research, scientific research. We're using modalities that are evidence-based, but we're fusing it all together in one big framework.
Correct. So you guys can sign up for that or learn more at 12weekrelationships.com. You can get a free 20-minute consult with Dr. Glenn where he can kind of guide you through on the phone what it's going to do for you. We also have a fun relationship quiz on the site too. That said, this episode is really all about going into the details of that framework. What does a healthy relationship look like? And within our introductory episodes, we did talk about this a little bit. But now we have the chance to kind of dive in, really dive in.
I'm really excited. Let's do this.
I think it's going to be fun.
Let's do this.
So I started this research project 5 years ago with a simple premise. Well, not a premise, an idea. And it came off the cusp of like my last counselor, I think that was 7 years ago. The last counselor I would individually meet with, I said to him, and I started asking this of every single person that wanted to give me advice, counselor, anyone. Just tell me what a healthy relationship looks like. And the counselor goes, Pi, you've read every book on the shelf and I don't know how to answer your question. What do you say to that, Glenn?
You just walk out. Right? You just walk out.
You got the license. You got the training. What do you mean?
He was basically saying, I can't help you.
So that kind of put me on this path of collecting my own data, doing my own research, and much of which came from my own experiences, came from, relationships that I could observe, came from actual like case studies and materials I could find. And then it came from watching what was happening in front of me, because with the camera, once my clients kind of trust me as a photographer, I get this access to their lives and I simply get to observe relationships that we have with each other, with their friends, with their families. So I just started documenting nuances. No details that could be identified, just like nuances. And we ended up, several years later, 500 case studies with this framework. And that's what we're going to discuss here. So the book that I wrote that led to you and I working together, this episode is essentially this entire framework. And granted, the book is going to go into a lot more detail and give examples and whatnot. But we can, in my opinion, good advice and good frameworks and good education should be able to be summarized over dinner with a friend.
No, I agree. Like it shouldn't be overly complicated. There's definitely sub-components, but it should be simple.
I'm glad you agree.
I agree.
I think I wrote this exact phrase in my book.
Oh, awesome.
And I said, this book is that.
Maybe it's an unconscious thing that, I read it and I'm just spewing it again.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. So this is that dinner or lunch, whatever you prefer. Lunch is less of a commitment. Let's do lunch.
All right.
Okay. My premise, maybe this sounds insane, was that I believed or I thought that maybe all relationships are identical.
Yeah, when you brought that up, I was like, you're full of shit. Because I disagreed with that too.
Yeah, from friendships to marriage to business partnerships to family. I thought that from the way that I was seeing things, it felt like it was more similar than it was dissimilar.
Yeah, and my interpretation was like you have characteristics as a person, and then you do more or less, but then the relationship dynamics are different.
Yeah.
That was the way I interpreted it before meeting you and reading your book.
Yeah. So I went about creating my research, and the research came from kind of the things that I've read from, lots of different books, lots of different places, then combining the experiences along with the case studies and trying to create this framework to it. But one of the scary things to me along this process was confirmation bias, was the idea that, because I believe that all relationships are identical, my thesis is that, all relationships follow the same fundamental framework. I might be trying to prove something that might inherently be wrong. So it was really scary when it got to the point where I was actually testing the model.
But that's when you know you're on the right path, right? Because if you're doing something that you're for sure doing, you're just within your comfort zone. So for you to have that fear and to say, I don't know, I'm going to try to figure this out, that's a good space to be in and to pursue.
Yeah. But spoiler alert, we've been doing clinical trials. We've used the model in several different client coaching arrangements, and we've used it over this past year. How has it gone so far?
It's been amazing.
So it's working.
It is working. And, one of the things, as we've put everything together, once we go to the section of building a healthy relationship, instead of people having like all these questions and what does this mean? Why are we fighting, or why is this taking place? It's almost like silence. Like it's just deep emotion and anger.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just becomes this moment of like, oh my God, everything is right in front of our face. And that's a consistent thing that happens every single time.
Yeah. It blows me. It blows me.
Yep.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't blow me.
You said this was a lunch date.
We should just leave.
You said this was a lunch date.
It is. It turned into a dinner date.
That was exactly. That's what I'm saying.
That was like dinner at my house, candle lights. No, it still blows me away that I've probably heard this 50 times now. That in one session, in 2 sessions, people walk away with more insight and understanding than all their years of therapy and reading and counseling, and suddenly things start to make sense. And then we go through the additional 8 to 10 weeks and we just help them to understand and refine and apply the model. They finish. And I mean, if you want to continue therapy with Dr. Glenn, you can. That's what you're there for, right?
Yeah,
but
maintenance.
At that point, it's really like, it's fun because they become their own experts. They come to you. And they're like, we're having this issue. We know that we're struggling with relatability on this subject. What's going on? And it's almost like you're just an advisor at that point, helping them to dial in and fine tune.
Well, I mean, this is kind of nerdy, but it makes me like, even like in school, like as a professor, when people come back and they're like, oh, this really helped me. Like it makes me feel good. So like when couples come, they'll follow up, and when they're like, oh my God, I know that this was my attachment issue. And then this was a counterbalanced effort that I needed to do, and they're using the language. It just feels amazing.
Yeah. So what we're about to go through is the framework, or this roadmap that came from this research project. And when you introduce the therapeutic component of like actually resolving trauma, and because the roadmap itself leads to bringing up all these issues. And in the book, I specifically state that we don't have enough time. I don't have the expertise, nor do I have the time to help you resolve trauma and past issues. So this is where you specialize in trauma and resolving these past issues. And so once we incorporated those two things together, we landed with core value focused therapy, which is this roadmap that guides us through the entire process of resolving past traumas and aligning values and everything. So we're basically just talking about the roadmap itself in this episode. And so far, we've set up the introduction, and people are probably like, well, all right, guys, what the hell is it? So it's simple. Each relationship, regardless of what you're looking at, is going to begin with desire. And you're like, okay, I know this. Okay, so we have to either want a friendship, we have to want, the relationship, a romance, whatever it might be. There has to be desire that makes us want to spend time with the other person. So desire has its components, which you and I will get into. That then feeds that want for quality time.
Yeah.
The next point that kind of brings us together, we spend time doing things together. And in the time that we spend together, we begin to discover whether we have sustainability. Now, we don't think of it in a term. We're not talking about, this friendship is not sustainable. You just start kind of slowly realizing that you might not have as much desire for the relationship, or maybe you realize that you want to spend more time together. So what ends up happening is in cases where spending time together is kind of emotionally costly, the relationship is not very sustainable. And that leads to kind of damaging your desire, your want for the relationship. In cases where it's easy and fun and interesting and exciting, then you fuel desire and you continue this loop. So desire leads to quality time. Quality time, we discover if it's sustainable. If it's sustainable, we feed desire, and it just loops.
It's a loop. And I think one of the points about your book that I really liked is sustainability for a long-term relationship is the key to seeing if this is going to last or not.
Yeah. And it's the only place to focus in on when it comes to a long-term relationship that is not functioning correctly. That's the focus, sustainability, because desire is a byproduct of sustainability.
Agreed. And it's almost like CVFT, like it's working backwards because you're in the relationship already. So you've gone through the desire components, the quality time. So we're really focusing on sustainability to loop back the desire and then time spending together and making sure that it feels good again and you guys are happier again and feel more in love again.
Correct. So as I was researching, it was like, okay, so this is the basic premise of a relationship. Desire leads us to quality time. If it's sustainable, we go back to feeding desire. Cool. Again, most of us can probably intuitively already get that. So for me, it was really dialing into what are the components of desire and what are the components of sustainability? What makes a relationship emotionally costly to maintain in that sustainability side? What makes us want a relationship to begin with on the desire side? Quality time was a pretty simple one to kind of dial into. I really loved, did you ever read The Like Switch?
No.
The Like Switch was a fantastic book. It was written by, I believe, Jack Schaefer. Maybe you can confirm, Anthony. He's an ex-FBI agent. And it was the first relationship book that I'd read that actually had a framework. And the reason why he had a framework was because he was teaching spies essentially to create relationships, FBI agents to create relationships with potential spies. So he needed a framework that he could use to train these agents on how do you do that? How do you build a relationship of trust and all that kind of stuff? And the book is incredible for many reasons. But I kind of boiled down in it. He gives this model for essentially what is quality time. It's frequency.
Is it duration?
Yeah,
duration?
Frequency, duration, intensity, and proximity. I think he uses those the acronym should make more sense than probably the way I just said it right now. But it's basically how often you're spending time together, the intensity of that engagement, being close to each other in proximity, all of that kind of stuff. And what I boiled that down to was just, that's quality time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what he's talking about is just relationships need meaningfully engaging activities that happen kind of often.
And if you're in proximity, if it's convenient, it makes it easier to do.
Correct. And so what I saw in his book, and there's so much more to that book than what I'm laying out, because he gives like tricks and techniques on how to build these relationships, how to approach them, all this kind of stuff. But he lays out this framework, and I saw it as kind of this one piece. This actually defines quality time very well. But what it didn't do, in my opinion, is Dr. Schaefer comes from the perspective of an FBI agent wanting to create a relationship with that spy, and the spy being intrinsically motivated to create that relationship because of whatever reasons, financially, politically, whatever it might be. So the desire piece was already resolved because there's a mutual want for the relationship to begin with. The sustainability piece is not necessarily a factor because we're talking like these aren't, long-term type. Well, I mean, they could be long-term relationships, but they are dependent on the reward being this, financial, political motivation type thing. So I felt like he had quality time, but we're missing the components of desire and sustainability.
Yeah, because in that dynamic, it's a short-term relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if it is a long-term one, it's based upon financial incentive. It's more like a business relationship than it is anything else, right? Anyway, I thought his approach in that framework was brilliant. And so for me, it was just figuring out, how do I figure out the pieces of desire and the pieces of sustainability? And that's where the case studies and the research and all the other books and everything came in play.
Where did the desire piece come into play? So I get the light switch with quality time, but how did desire come into play?
So desire became a big thing for me. I love Esther Perel's work.
Yeah,
she's amazing. And the work that she does on specifically in romance and trying to understand that, what we're looking for in our romantic relationships and our partners is this excitement. And yet what we're demanding in those relationships is safety. And those two things don't necessarily go together because, well, it's difficult to demand safety and then yet expect something to be exciting, regardless of what it is. I mean, I could guarantee that you'll be safe inside of a race car simulator, but it's not going to be as exciting because it's a simulator, right? And I could say that, well, driving a race car is kind of safe. There's 5-point harnesses and, you're in a cage, but it's dangerous and you could go off the track and people can hit you and it is a risky activity. But that's precisely what makes it exciting.
So Esther Perel's work in terms of the balance between excitement and safety was what formed desire for you.
That was a piece of it. That was like, okay, why are these friendships not as exciting anymore? Why are romantic relationships not as exciting anymore? The other side of it was attraction. I hated the way that we had typically described attraction. When you think of attraction, you think of it as physical, right? But in my mind, I've been platonically attracted to all of my friends. I mean, if anybody, it doesn't matter who you are, what your gender is, what your, identity is. When you meet a friend, there is some form of attraction there. We don't call it that because attraction denotes like physical attraction. But then attraction by itself isn't enough either because I have personally, and if you ask yourself this question, I could define 10, 15 people in my personal life who I have met who are absolutely gorgeous, but I find kind of repulsive. Like I don't want a relationship with them. So that was the big piece that made me question desire. I didn't think attraction was oversimplistic, and it felt like there's something else going on in these moments that make you desire a relationship.
So in your mind, were you fusing it all together? So attraction, excitement, safety, like is that the desire piece in your opinion?
I mean, I was starting to come up with the pieces of it and trying to like say, okay, what happens in a relationship? So what I would do is basically follow these different case studies and I'd look for the breaking points. And so what I found was desire begins with regard. Whether you're talking a friendship, whether you're talking a business partnership, whether you're talking a romantic relationship, or 10 years into a marriage, the first step of wanting a relationship is regard. And we can't simplify that down to just attraction, which is why I chose the term regard. Regard is how you look upon somebody, right? You need to have a high regard for someone. And that it can include their appearance, but it also includes other factors. The admiration you have of the person, the respect of the person, shared values, the, potential in any of these arenas, maybe status can be a potential piece of regard. But all of this is what builds up the want for a relationship. And ultimately, you can't want a relationship for a person that you don't respect. And that was the missing piece for attraction to me.
No, that is so true, because if you have low regard, you're just going to disrespect the person and it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. So how many people are in 10 years into a marriage saying things like, I just don't even think I want this anymore. I don't want to spend time.
Yeah. Marriage is just, you just exist. We're just here together, eating together, and that's it.
I mean, how many of those cases have you personally seen?
I've seen a lot. I mean, I've seen couples come in where basically there's no passion, there's no emotion, and they're just kind of going through the motions of their life.
Hmm.
And then their friendships and their outside activities become the excitement in their life, where the marriage itself is just a place to sleep
Hmm.
and just to kind of pay bills and just kind of be there or take care of the kids. I've noticed this a lot is once the kids are gone, because it's kind of it fuses them together. There's a value there, but once the kids are gone, that's when everything kind of goes to shit.
Yeah.
And then that's where the fighting increases, the stonewalling and all of that takes place, and the marriage is there. There really is no marriage at that point.
Yeah. That's the interesting part is that the kids offer this form of distraction, right? That both people are kind of interested in. It's like a shared common interest piece, but it doesn't change the underlying values. And when that distraction is gone, then you start to realize. And the bottom line is when regard is eroded away, you're left with contempt. And what I loved, Gottman Institute does a lot of really great research, and I like a lot of that research and what he does, and him and his wife. And they talk about what is it? The four horsemen of the apocalypse. I think you could come up with a better name for that. I mean, something that's maybe not.
But it sticks. It sticks.
It does stick. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but basically he describes contempt in a relationship. And that being like the kind of marking stone of like, this is the end of a relationship. And Gottman does most of his research in terms of friendships and whatnot. But when I read that, I was like, contempt marks the end of any relationship. And the question to me was then, why? This is what I have a hard time sometimes with, academic research, is that oftentimes we discover something, but we don't look for the why underneath it. And so Gottman has like a 90-something% chance of being able to predict someone's divorce within a few minutes, right? Which I get. Like if you're insightful and in tune and you have the research, you can do that. And you can do that with very good accuracy. But more important than being able to predict that they're going to divorce, to me, was understanding why. Why are they going to divorce?
And I think that's where our approach is different, because instead of just saying like, this is a predictor that you guys are not going to last, like we would probably explore the contempt and the stonewalling and the not talking. And we would look at their attachments, their relationship history, what they brought into the relationship. And then once they take accountability for their own issues pre-relationship, then knowing what a healthy relationship is, a lot of that can be addressed and possibly resolved.
For sure. And the big piece of, like you said, the big thing for me was in each of these, the whole purpose of defining this model was to get to the why of all of it.
Correct.
So regard described that why, because it ties directly to the other side of our equation. On sustainability, we have core values. Regard on the desire side is the driving force of your want for relationship. Aligned core values on the sustainability side is the driving force of sustainability and lowering the emotional cost of maintaining the relationship. And the bottom line is, over time, a person is going to say or do things that either show that they share similar values or that they don't have those same values. Doesn't matter how you acknowledge it. Doesn't matter whether it's subconscious and you don't even notice it. But that's what's eroding regard. When those values are not aligning, your regard for the person is dropping. And it's crazy because in so many cases, I will sit down with a couple and they will talk about, and I'll say, do you guys respect each other? They'll both say, yeah. Yeah, we do. I love and admire them. And I go, okay. I define regard and what it is. And I say, again, do you guys honestly respect each other? And they go, no.
Yeah.
They don't even recognize it themselves because they're saying what they want to believe in a lot of these situations, but their behavior is not one of regard. Like if you're sitting across from me and you say something, like let's say that you're talking to Anthony.
What's up, Anthony?
What's up? That was a great conversation, guys. Thank you.
It was deep, right?
If I have regard for you, I'm going to pay attention to the conversation that you're having. If I don't, I'm going to look at my phone. If you tell a story, I'm going to look at you while you're talking. If you don't, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to be engaged with you when I have regard. If you say something that I disagree with, I'm not going to scoff. I'm going to say, this is where I might agree to disagree, my friend.
Yeah, there's a healthy level of respect in how you're addressing your partner.
So you can see, and these are the things that I could, when I said like I was observing, from behind the camera, these are the things that I'm observing. It's not who they are or anything identifiable. It's specifically characteristics in these moments.
Well, the other interesting thing too is that there's something known as reaction formation. So doing the opposite of how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
So like, like I'm going to kick your butt. Like you're acting really strong on the outside, but deep down you're really scared.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen in a lot of the coaching sessions is the person that's like overdoing for the other partner. It looks like they have high regard because they're doing all these things, but underneath they look at that person like they're incapable of doing anything.
It happens so often.
Yeah. So then that regard is actually very, very low.
Yeah.
Or on the flip side, you'll have a person that on the outside, they're just completely disregarding this person. But underneath, they actually have a high regard for them, but they just have issues that they need to work out.
Yeah. So one of the wild realizations that I had in this process was, can you think of a close friend of yours that you don't respect?
Like at a distance, like I could think of like, someone.
But that's what I mean. Close friend. Do you have any close friends who you'd want to spend a lot of time with that you don't respect? Where there's no regard?
No.
No. But we can think of many examples of romantic relationships and marriages where people stay despite not liking each other, despite having no regard for the other person, no respect, no admiration whatsoever. And that's the other piece that kind of clued me into, I think we're looking, again, it was a supporting piece. I think we're looking at this same framework. The difference on the friendship side is that there's not this intrinsic value, this societal attachment of marriage to the friendship that makes us want to work through every single component. We just let the friendship go, or we let it be something casual or just an acquaintance. We don't require the other person to do any of those things because our expectations are minimized in that case. But in a marriage, there's all these expectations, societal, religious, spiritual, personal, everything that makes us stay and continue working. In reality, if that romance was just a romance, it would have ended just like the friendship. So we're not, again, it kind of showed me that we're not looking at two different frameworks. We're just looking at different approaches to resolving the problem, or maybe a different weight on the relationship.
Well, I mean, I remember this was early on when you were showing me the frameworks like desire, quality time, sustainability. And then I was like, I was talking about some friend like I've known, since I was a kid. And then we hardly see each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you were like, oh. And I was like, yeah, I don't know why we don't get together more, because we should, because we have such a long history together. And you said, because the only thing sustaining you is your history of friendship.
Correct.
You have no desire and no other interest together.
Correct.
Except the history, which is why you guys just see each other once. That really hit home for me because it helped me see the loop of like, okay, this framework applies to all these different types of relationships or family members. The only thing sustaining certain family members is because we're just family, but there's not the desire, there's not the quality time. It's just, we're just family member, we're blood.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. Like, you might again be more inclined to work on a family relationship because it's family, but that doesn't mean that the framework is any different.
Correct.
So I kind of begin seeing all these points that were like, I don't think I'm just trying to prove my own theory at this point. I think it's actually lining up. And there were tweaks in a lot of and by no means is any of this stuff perfect. I feel like in 5-10 years from now, this model is going to be even more refined. But what I was getting to was something that was working. So we have the desire piece. We know that regard is the first piece of desire. You can't want a relationship, any relationship, without, having regard for the individual. The other side of that is sustainability and core values. And this is where I want to bounce to that side, because we have these two linchpins on each side. Core values is the primary piece of sustainability that's going to dictate whether you have more regard for a person or whether it gets kind of killed over time. And what most of us think are core values are not.
Correct. Like it can't be a superficial thing. Like I go to church, so therefore my core value is I'm religious.
Yeah, I mean, you've asked this in a clinical setting multiple times. What do you think are your values? What do people say?
Usually family
Hmm.
or, my faith
Hmm.
or, I'm passionate about life. Like it's very generic.
Very generic, like typical responses. Have a strong work ethic. The actual core value, which we have as an exercise now, is you repeatedly ask why until we can dial into why somebody is spiritual. Why do you go to church? Why do you believe it's important to be spiritual? Why do you study? Why do you work so hard? Why do you believe it's important to be kind to others? The underlying why is the actual core value. And a person will only have, I didn't realize this when I was designing it, but as I kept doing during this research period, some of my friends knew what I was working on. So I would have friends refer couples to me just to basically informally, help coach and guide. And each time I began to realize that most people only had 3 to 5 of these core values. And those 3 to 5 core values dictated all of their behavior.
Exactly. And why they're having conflict, why certain things work out and certain things don't.
Yeah.
It was like very clear and very in your face.
So when you began asking that question, what underlying reasons were you getting at?
It basically came down to like growth. Like that's a big one. Like usually like one person really wants to grow as a person,
Like they have a need to.
to be a better person,
Mhm.
and they're really passionate about learning and growing. That's a big one.
Yeah. Another big one is like, I believe my time here is limited. I want to make the most of it.
I want to do everything possible.
Hmm.
And then kind of like not a negative core value, but a lot of people just want to preserve what they have
Hmm.
and then just be as safe as possible and to do the least amount. And so when you have people that have those differing core values, that's where the source of conflict becomes very high.
Yeah. What was crazy about the work that we started doing together was in our early trials, we began realizing that you could have positive core values. You could also have negative core values that were rooted in trauma.
Correct. And then once you work out the trauma, you could really figure out what you really want.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love the fact that it goes really, really deep. And then it becomes, instead of this kind of distraction of like this fight, this topic, it just goes down to the core of the issue.
Correct.
And it just becomes like the mind goes blank and it's like, oh, like there's nothing really to say other than I could see why we're not getting along.
Yeah. Now, just from these two components, we have the basis of, again, what we call core value focused therapy, because it begins with understanding those core values, identifying them for each individual, creating a roadmap of how they're going to come together, and working to repair regard, because you can't want to work on a relationship that you don't want. So we have to so core value focused therapy means that we're going to begin with core values. We're going to help repair the regard, and then we're going to move to the other pieces throughout this entire period.
No, I agree. And to piggyback on what you said about constantly asking why, I love the fact that, there's something known as mentation where you're just kind of thinking without thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so like once you keep doing more whys, why, first it's the societal things that they're told, what their parents told them, what TV tells them, all these things start to go away. And then it becomes rooted in what they truly, truly want and desire.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So now that we understand this, we can start going to the other components. So we call them the 5 R's of desire and the 5 C's of sustainability. So there's 5 components on each of these sides. Quality time is a pretty simple one. Meaningfully engaging activities. TV is probably less meaningful than, this kind of a conversation.
it depends on the show. Come
It
on,
does.
man.
Game of Thrones, you could have some good conversations around. Same thing with, I've been getting into all these weird drama shows like Bridgerton. I've always loved Grey's Anatomy, but relationship shows I like.
They're good. No, Grey's is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 5 R's of desire, the 5 C's of sustainability. So let's go back to the early phases of a relationship. You have that regard for someone. You perceive that it's someone that you respect, admire, whether it's a friendship, whatever it is. The next piece is reward. We all have to admit that relationships need to be beneficial. It doesn't have to be financially motivated, although for some it is, but there needs to be some form of personal benefit, and it needs to be a mutual benefit between the two, but there needs to be reward in that relationship.
And usually it's like this emotional feeling of like, man, this makes me happy.
Yeah.
And I enjoy spending time together. So that is usually the reward at the beginning.
Or maybe it makes you laugh. I have friends that make me laugh that, how you have friends that you might put into different buckets of what they provide to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some make me laugh, some challenge me, some, provide great discussion, conversation. But those rewards, once again, tie to my values. Now, this is the crazy part. You don't think it's crazy. Our people might think it's crazy, our listeners. Those rewards, when they tie to our individual values, that means that if we're in a place where our values are built around trauma and negative experiences, you're going to find reward in relationships that cover that trauma. So for example, let's say you grew up in a poor household. You were, you had no other choice than to go out and find a job when you were 13 years old to help provide a living for the family. You didn't go to college. Well, that traumatic past experience and constantly struggling and fighting just to survive each day, just to put food on the table, is going to give you a sense of reward for any relationship that gives you financial stability.
True. Like it'll trigger both. Like it depends on your stage of trauma. So for example, like if I'm that person and then let's say I have two choices and you're very financially stable and you're really, really healthy. And then there's another person that needs my support. And then I have to take care of them just like I have to take care of my parents. And I'm in deep trauma. I'm going to be really attracted to that person that's in debt.
Mm-hmm.
However, if I'm working myself out of the trauma, getting more clear with my core values, I'm going to feel like more attracted to you because I'm becoming healthier. But at the same time, all of my issues are going to be coming out and directed toward you.
Yeah. But this is what's crazy because you could have like, let's say a couple. And again, a lot of our references go back to the couple because in friendships, most of these end naturally, right? Doesn't mean that the framework isn't there. It just means that they stop before it gets to that place. But you'll have a couple where one person, you'll hear people say, I just wish he or she had a job. If they had a job, I had a friend tell me, if she had a job, I would have married her. And I'm like, dude, that's a basic.
Yeah.
That's like a fundamental. But you come from that place because, again, that past experience, that trauma makes you see reward in that. Now, once you can provide for yourself, and this is where we get the, how society looks down on gold digging. And granted, it's not a good reason to go create a relationship with someone for financial incentive. But what we're looking at in a gold digger is somebody that is traumatized because they've never been able to provide a good living for themselves. They're terrified of this. So they're willing to give up any and everything just for a person to provide for them. That's what you're looking at.
No, agreed. And a gold digger is usually projecting their helplessness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they themselves don't think that they can sustain on their own.
So we're not looking at like someone's born evil. We're looking at trauma. And when that same person, the same person who says, if he or she just had a job, I would have married them. Or, early on in our relationship, all I wanted was stability. And they recognize that. Well, once they gain that stability, maybe they become a lawyer, a doctor. They learn how to provide for themselves. Now their reward shifts because their values have shifted. They can provide for themselves. They don't need somebody to provide the basics. They want love and connection. They want somebody that can feed into their values. They want somebody that can, it follows essentially Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. And then the low level trauma is no longer the value. And now it's about a healthy relationship.
Totally. So your sense of reward evolves. And this was my issue with Dr. Chapman's book, Love Languages. I love that book. Dr. Chapman does incredible work. He's fantastic. I love the way that it was simplified down to these are the 5 typical love languages that people use to express things to one another. But people started to take those terms literally and to say, this is my love language. This is how to show your appreciation. This is how I like gifts. I like quality time. And the reality was, in my view, in this framework, that's not accurate. See, I don't like gifts. But if you understand who I am and what I value, and you gift me a book, that's something that I've been wanting to read, I would love that gift. And I don't need you to go and sit down and watch TV with me. But if you invite me to grab some coffee and have a good conversation, I love that quality time. Our love languages are all of them when spoken through the underlying value.
Yeah, and I think what to piggyback off of that, it's not saying that that's not important, but if the value of those activities is not there, it's kind of meaningless.
Correct.
Right? Like TV, like you said, TV watching, what if you watch something you don't like? But we like UFC.
Mm-hmm.
So like if that's something that oh, I'm gifting you this, okay, then that has more meaning.
Isn't that funny? Because I just gave an example of where you sitting down and watching TV with me would not be something that I would consider quality time. But when you said UFC, that for me is quality time.
Yeah, it's quality time.
Like to sit down and engage with you and talk about the fights and to be doing that is incredible. So in understanding the underlying values and what somebody believes and what drives them, you don't have to ask what your love languages are. You can speak them naturally in every format, and we all have those.
Yeah, and so instead of putting all of the emphasis on the activities, it's the intention behind what you are doing and living the truth of who you are and honoring that person. It goes deeper than just activities.
Yeah, I mean, and it goes back to the way that I learn. I talk a lot in my education that I've never been able to learn through memorization or specific actions. I learn through understanding the why. So when it comes to every framework and everything that I develop, it's the why. Okay, so now I have an explanation for reward and how it ties to that. When a relationship loses its reward, what happens, Glenn?
It starts to diminish. The desire to want to be in that relationship starts to go away.
Okay, let me give you an analogy. Real life stories that and I want you to explain what happens. You meet another potential friend at a convention, and you've heard a good amount, of positive things from each other. And so, you both go and kind of strike up a conversation, and there's like a mutual respect there. 2 minutes in the conversation, the other person asks, I would really appreciate if you can help me promote my work and my platforms. What happens?
So initially we're just meeting up just conversationally, and then this person springs that on me.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically sharing their core value of like, this is a business related thing and this is where I want to take it. And then I have to make the decision if I want to honor that or not.
Okay. That's one thing for sure. What also happens to your sense of reward for the relationship?
It goes down because that's not what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because unless I'm looking for a mutual thing to support my business as well.
Mm-hmm.
If we have that shared value, then yeah, it makes sense. But if not, it just kind of killed my desire to talk to that person or spend time with that person.
Yeah, it makes you instantly identify a one-way relationship, right?
Yeah.
Someone that kind of wants to use and they see reward and you no longer do. Unless, like you said, if you have that shared interest or shared value and it's something mutually beneficial, that would be different. But how many times, does somebody that is successful get approached and initially you have this conversation with another person and it's going great and there's a mutual respect and regard, and then there's a shift towards what can you do for me? And right when that shift happens, you can watch the other person's desire turn off like a light switch.
No, absolutely. Because, well, I mean, at least that person is being honest and then their value is coming out. But at least for you, like if that's not what you're looking for, that's the time to just say no.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing though is I don't think they're intentionally being honest. I think that's just who they are basically.
Yeah. That's their stage of life at that time.
Yeah. Exactly. That's their stage of life at the time. And that's where it's beautiful because it ties back into Psychology 101 when you go to Maslow's hierarchy and you're like, okay, you're essentially going to see reward in different ways based on each of these different phases of Maslow's hierarchy, starting from your most basic needs, surviving, to feeling love and connection, until eventually you're at the self-actualization step where you're basically becoming your best self. And then your reward is in relationships of people that share the same values.
Yeah, and once you're at that self-actualization place, that's when you can be in a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, because without that, you're just gonna. It's all these other factors that are playing in.
I mean, I think people can be in. See, that one's a tough one for me to accept because I do believe a lot of people marry and they do this young. I did this young. And I do believe a lot of them can work through the steps together and be healthy and get to a place where, they both reach that step and it's core value focused. But it needs to be this progression where they're working together and they need to be aware of it and they need to be going together on this journey. I do believe that you can do that. But yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, but that means that there has to be individual accountability throughout that process.
Correct.
Yeah. And then each of them recognizing that we're not in a healthy space. We're in this trauma state together.
Yeah.
Let's work this trauma state out, be accountable to get to the actualization.
Yeah. And while it's possible to do, that's not what our data shows us happens most often, right? When they're in those states, they're lacking the accountability, the mutual effort, the desire to go. And even when they do go to counseling or something, then they land at some place that is, they're not given a framework or anything effective. They're given more advice and more, like kind of anecdotal guidance.
Yeah, reframing and more gifts, more hand holding and more physical touch.
Yeah.
But what if you're repulsed by that person at the time? It's like, please do not touch me at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
okay. So we have regard, we have reward. Next. So each of these, I would literally just spell out every single one of these different relationship scenarios, ones that I would see, ones that I would see in front of my camera, ones that I would see on TV, everything, right? See in real life, all of it. The next one was, what happens when you walk up to a guy or girl or anybody? I feel like I have to be super sensitive about gender right now, so please just understand that I sympathize and just forgive me for my sucktasticness. But you walk up to somebody and maybe you're romantically interested and you say, "Hi, my name is Pi. I would love to sit down and have coffee with you." And you go, "Not interested."
okay.
What happens to my desire?
Your desire goes away.
Yeah, unless I'm a stalker, right? Unless I'm...
I mean, maybe you have really high confidence. You're like, this is a challenge.
Some people do have tons of confidence and they will persist to a point. But ultimately, when the feelings are not mutual, the desire will shut off. And that brings us to the next piece of desire, which was reciprocation. That there's a social expectation. There's an expectation that you're going to reciprocate my advances. We like the people who like us, right? So if I don't get a sense of reciprocation from a friendship, from a romantic relationship, whatever that might be, then it hurts my desire to stay the course.
And I love that you say that because, that whole like religious thing, like you should give without wanting anything in return. Yes, but also like a healthy relationship, there is that give and take. There has to be some form of reciprocation.
In a healthy relationship, you don't have to expect it. The other person does it.
They're just kind of doing it.
Yeah. So, but it's also unrealistic to think that you can maintain, again, going back to maintaining a one-way relationship.
Yeah, unless you're just really into punishing yourself.
Or if you're a stalker.
Or if you're a stalker.
Yeah.
Either or.
If you are sociopathic, then you kind of shut off the need for somebody to reciprocate. You kind of just stay the course anyway to your own and someone else's detriment. Please do not do this.
They're just taking anyway. So.
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't realize is that reciprocation, it's easy to think of it in the sense of like you approach somebody at a bar and you get shut down, right? What we don't think of is all the moments that we reject our friends, all the moments that we reject our partner. Anytime a friend calls you, texts you, "Hey, you want to hang out? Oh, I'm busy tonight." That is rejection. You are not reciprocating. Anytime a partner says, "How would you get frisky, Grant?" I would touch your toe. I'd be like, "Hey,
I'll reciprocate. I'll touch your toe bag, man."
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a different touch.
I'm sorry,
not
man.
the same kind of like touch.
I'm sorry, man.
But if you're like, "I got a headache tonight. I can't, I'm sorry." That is rejection. That is failing to reciprocate. And enough of those start to affect the desire that I have to stay the course. I'm going to stop asking, whether it's a friend to go out, whether it's whatever. So we have to protect that.
No, it's true because it's showing a level of respect. If you keep rejecting someone, you're not really respecting that person at all.
Yeah.
So
The next piece of desire was risk. This came to Esther Perel's work.
yeah, and this was when you brought it up about risk and like you have to take chances and positive risk. Part of me was like, no, you just be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Just be safe. You don't need risk. But it's important and vital to have some form of excitement in your marriage, relationship, and to do things out of your comfort zone together because that builds the desire in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, risk is, I define it as the unknown, right? So it's basically that the possibility that something might not go as you hope or expect. But that's exactly what makes something exciting. And if you think about every early relationship, doesn't matter friendship, doesn't matter partnership, just in talking about the idea of partnering together 6 months ago, that was exciting, right?
No, it was. It was like exciting, scary, all at the same time.
Because you don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And we still don't know where it's going to go, right? We have big hopes, big dreams, but we don't know. When we're 10 years down the road and we have achieved what we wanted to achieve, and it is laid out and guaranteed in front of us, it's no longer exciting. If it's easy to get into Stanford, it's not exciting. It's exciting and worth celebrating because of a high potential of not getting that thing, right? So risk is the piece that makes everything worthwhile.
Well, I think it's also mental and emotional expansion. So when you mention like this business is no longer exciting at a certain point, that just means that there's something bigger out there that you can do.
Yeah. When you've lost the possibility of failing, you lose your excitement. You lose that piece that makes it, honestly, kind of, in my opinion, worthwhile. But that's what I thought Esther Perel was doing such beautiful work on, was she was saying that this excitement, this passion, it can't exist within the demand of safety. You have to embrace the idea that your relationships are not guaranteed to succeed. There is the possibility of failure. That is what makes it exciting. And to force somebody to make it safe, to make you feel safe, to make you feel constantly wanted, to reinsure and to do all those things is to diminish that excitement and passion.
Yeah, and you're just feeding a trauma issue instead of trying to build a healthy relationship.
Yeah. The last piece of that desire side is relatability. I made relatability last, not because it was any less important. It's because early on in a relationship, we tend to perceive relatability. It's not a factor. Relatability is our ability to connect, to engage with one another meaningfully, for you to understand who I am, for me to understand who you are. And that ties back, again, to one of our core human needs. Don't we need to be understood?
Absolutely. If you don't have things that you can relate to, there's really nothing to connect with, communicate, or talk about.
Okay, so you pull up to a gas station. In front of you is a dude that gets off his Harley Davidson, all tattooed up, listening to AC/DC, going on a road trip. Do you start a conversation?
Probably not.
Why?
Because I don't listen to AC/DC, I don't have a Harley, and I don't have tats.
Okay. So what you're doing is what we'd all do. We would make a judgment based on perceived relatability. And it's very likely that the opposite is also true. When you see somebody who you'd like to have a conversation with, you're going to perceive them to be relatable, that they would understand who you are. Oh, they must be an academic. Maybe they teach. Maybe they do this. Maybe they run a business. You come up with all these ideas of how you're relatable. Have you seen people do this?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's coming from their own lens. It's their own, it's like sunglasses. It's tinted in the way that they're seeing that person.
Yeah. So relatability is a requirement of desire. When we find that we're no longer relatable, we just don't want the relationship, right? Like the case of the Harley and that kind of stuff. If we perceive that we're not relatable, we're good. Desire shuts off.
Yeah.
But the tricky part is that we don't truly know whether we're relatable until we understand our values and the pieces of sustainability. So in the meantime, we just perceive it.
Yeah, it's a perception. And then one thing I like, some of the examples that you gave is like desire in and of itself is like a fling, a weekend fling. There's nothing else other than just the passion and the desire to be there, and then it just kind of ends.
Yeah, when you're saying that we have desire and that's feeding quality time in a romantic relationship, but there's no sustainability,
Yeah.
you have a fling.
You have a fling, and it could be a weekend, it could be maybe months, it could be off and on, but it's just the desire quality time. So then the sustainability component is kind of the foundation of seeing if this relationship will work, which then will feed the desire and quality time.
Totally. For that, for the short-term nature of a fling, you do have regard for the person. You haven't spent enough time to discover whether you have differing values. You're perceiving relatability because, again, it must be right. It feels too good to not be right. There's that chemical, and that chemical kind of rush of these new romances plays into the risk, the feeling of excitement, and like this is a new adventure, especially when you fuel it with intimacy. With sex, then everything gets, I mean, that can be enough of a reward in and of itself to keep it going for a time. So a fling is basically a desire that fuels quality time. But as you keep going in this loop, you begin to discover there really is no sustainability. We don't share the same values. We don't share, common interests. We don't, change and grow together. We don't really put in a balanced effort. None of those things are present. And you don't think of it consciously. Again, it's subconscious. But what we do is then start to say things like, well, opposites must attract. You begin to realize that you're very different people. Yeah, this was some cosmic force.
Yeah, and you try to force to make this work instead of just seeing that there is no sustainability.
Yeah.
Or not working toward building sustainability.
And the truth is that the person didn't change. It's not a case of cosmic force and opposites attract in some weird magnetic bond. In a romantic case, it's you found the person hot. There was enough reward in having sex with each other. And once that's no longer exciting, you discover that you're not really relatable. You're not the same people. You perceived it, and you can even find cases where people dream it, right? How many of us have been in those early dating phases and dreamt of how this story is going to play out?
Yeah. Or even if you're in that fling, people will romanticize it and be like, oh, that's the one that got away.
Yeah.
Versus like, that wasn't sustainable at all.
This is that perceived nature of these earlier relationships. Now, in a friendship format, you can have the same thing. These are the bromances, right? The quick womances, bromances, the relationships that, start out strong, they're friendships, but then they don't kind of continue. And again, because they're missing that sustainability piece, we just lower the intensity. And that was the main thing that I found in this framework was that it's the same framework across all relationships. The only difference was intensity. You take the intensity of the relationship up, you ratchet up your expectations. You take the intensity down, you ratchet down your expectations. That was it.
Yeah. No, it's very clear. And then the more the expectations go higher, the more opportunity there is to have a better relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's jump now to the other side. So these are the 5 pieces that I found within desire that kind of defined what makes us want desire, what strengthens desire, with a relationship, and what can weaken it. Now we get to sustainability. We already know core values. The next piece of this would be conflict resolution. That one's pretty straightforward, right? You spend a lot of time resolving conflict when you're spending time with each other. The emotional cost ratchets up, and that kind of diminishes reward. Like, if most of the time that we spend together isn't fun and we're dealing with crap all the time, my reward goes down and my desire suffers.
Yeah, and once again, regular conflict resolution is communicate better, use I statements, be more calm.
This is like typical clinical advice.
It's kind of this surface level resolution. So you're not fighting as much, but what's stewing underneath still exists versus your conflict is coming from misaligned core values. Yeah. And if you get to the root of it, you could look at all of your fights, which is what we do, and say, this is why you guys are not getting along.
Absolutely. Again, all of that going back to core value focused therapy. It starts with core values.
Yes.
Okay, so conflict resolution is a fairly simple one to understand. We spend a lot of time resolving conflict. We're increasing emotional cost, lowering reward of the relationship. Counterbalanced effort.
So counterbalanced effort, once again, the things that you have shared core values in, you're going to work toward each other to support each other. But the ones that are different, you're going to have to counterbalance and put more effort into what your other partner values. Maybe you don't value it, but you need to incorporate it because it's important to that partner,
Absolutely.
and vice versa. And if you do that, then you start building new core values, right?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes aligned together, and then you start building a better relationship.
Yeah. Counterbalance effort was my way of redefining mutual effort. I don't like the term mutual effort because it kind of implied that the effort had to be the same on both sides.
50-50 each time.
Yeah, but that's not the way that it works. I mean, in a friendship, one person likes to plan and the other person likes to, just go and have a good time and maybe pay for everybody to have a good time. In a marriage, one person takes care of the home while the other person, is working. You don't necessarily have mutual effort where it's identical. And this is the weird thing, is that in many cases, and even in my own personal case, I would find that my ex-wife would say, you need to be home as much as I am. You need to do as much in the home as I am. This is like in college. And I would say, but I'm working 3 jobs and going to school and supporting us. How do I do that? And it was kind of that same expectation. I hear couples all the time talking, like saying, you need to spend as much time as I do with the kids, or you need to do as much as I'm, but that's impossible.
Yeah.
Unless you're both holding each other to, like, you need to work as much as I do. I need to work as much as you do. You need to do the same thing. Mutual effort is a fictitious idea. So instead you have counterbalanced effort. And what that means is we have to recognize that we're each going to contribute naturally in our own values and areas of the relationship. And we have to, like you said, cross over in the other areas to balance out any other effort.
Yeah, it's balance and complementing. So it's not equal. It's just some may do more in certain areas, others in other areas, but there's a complement and balance in it all.
Yeah. Okay. The next piece of sustainability is change and growth.
Change and growth. So once you guys are counterbalancing efforts that are different from the core values, now you're growing individually and as a couple, because now you're growing mentally and emotionally because you're incorporating each other's. You're thinking outside of yourself.
Yeah.
And that shift is a beautiful thing to see throughout the coaching process, because then this is change and growth. Because when they're spending a lot of time fighting, you're staying in the same mental and emotional space. You're limited belief systems. But once you start implementing counterbalance effort, they're both not fighting anymore. They're just trying to understand to make their relationship better. And that it goes from fighting to what can we do to make this better? It becomes more solution focused.
Absolutely. And when I wrote this into sustainability, it was because I wanted to kind of go in the face of this idea that change was a bad thing. I mean, how often do you hear us in common just kind of dialogue going, we're not friends anymore. They changed, he or she changed. That's why the relationship change is like literally the only constant. And there would be no framework that could operate with the expectation that you stay still, that you are the same person 10 years from now. Maybe some people can do that. Maybe some people can fall into a routine and be the same person today that they are in 20 years. But that can't be the rule, because the majority are not going to be that. We're going to change and we're going to grow. And in fact, what I found was that change and growth was this thing where both people, we need to be uncomfortable and embrace the idea of being uncomfortable. What is it? Comfortable with uncomfortable situations.
Comfortable with uncomfortable, yeah.
So in that change and in that growth process, we notice that, like you said, our values can kind of shift. We can come together. We can also learn and grow in our own individual ways, which then boosts the risk and reward in the relationship. Because if I'm learning and I'm improving and I'm becoming someone different, it gives you and I more things to talk about, more things to share, right?
Yeah, I mean, and even in research, like healthy relationship, there's something known as a positive feedback loop, which basically means that if you have a relationship that accepts that change is always happening, that you're more prepared to deal with the changes of life. Because even that example, the person does the same routine for 20 years. Maybe their routine is the same, but their life outside is different, because nothing ever stays the same.
Yeah.
And then most people try to function in what's known as a negative feedback loop. They want to reduce deviation. They try to keep everything the same, so everything is rigid. There's a lot of rule following, and then it reduces emotional expression.
Yeah. So change and growth is something to be embraced. It's part of what makes the relationship sustainable.
And it's factual, because nothing ever stays the same, no matter what.
Correct. That is like one of the only, that is literally a law of nature. Like things change.
Yes.
So that's how we continuously feed reward. It's how we can feed regard. I mean, all of these pieces in sustainability is how we can feed pieces of desire, right? This one tying directly to risk and reward. If I'm changing, if there's something always new and evolving, it makes the relationship more exciting. And unlike common advice, it's not exciting anymore. You guys are losing your connection. Go and do the things you used to do. Go and
No.
The advice is the exact opposite.
Yeah, you have to grow, and you can never go back to who you were, no matter how hard you try.
Correct.
Right?
And
Like in sports, when people go, "I'm going to go back to who I was," that's a kiss of death. Their career's over.
yeah, it would be more accurate and simpler to say, no, do things you've never done before.
Exactly, and accept who you are. Be prepared for the next stage of your life or your evolution.
Correct. So change and growth is that piece that allows us to align values. It allows us to bring things together, allows us to feed risk and reward and do all that. Then the last piece, and when you find that when you're in a relationship where you're changing and growing and where the other person is not, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a romantic relationship, a family relationship, it doesn't matter. You start losing desire. It just starts to diminish because who you are and you're an evolving person, and the reward and the risk and the excitement of the relationship is just not there anymore, and it starts to get stale and routine. And so the opposite of this change and growth is a relationship getting boring and routine. Okay. Last piece of sustainability was common interests. Again, not because it's any less important than the others. It's a very important piece. In fact, I think it was the CEO of eHarmony said that common interests are not that big of a factor when it comes to successful relationships. And that's where I wanted to call BS on that. He actually had a really great statement when it came to conflict resolution. He said that more important than your ability to resolve conflict was your approach to conflict. That's a higher indicator of relationship success. And that lined up with every bit of research and clinical trials that we've done as well.
But that's a core value statement.
Correct. That is a core value statement in the way that they approach it. But this statement I did not agree with, because at first it sounds kind of surface level, and you might go, yeah, it's okay to have differing hobbies and interests. And yes, we all should have our own thing, right? But if we don't have any common interests, and a common interest by how I define it is an interest that you and I both would do on our own. We find that activity personally engaging, that we would do it without the other person's involvement. So when we do it together, it's truly a common interest. Each of those common interests create opportunities for us to spend quality time together. We don't always have to do things together, but each thing that lines up gives us one more chance to spend time together in a way that can satisfy both my needs and your needs and the relationship's needs at the same time. And the less common interest that we have, again, the higher the bar on counterbalanced effort. Every one of these components of sustainability, the less aligned they are and less intact, you raise counterbalanced effort. You have to try that much harder. When we don't have similar interests, I have to join you in your world where I'm feeding you, and you have to join me in my world where you're feeding me. Because if we don't do that, then we're not going to get time together. And the reality is very simple. Life only gets more busy. When it gets busy, when you pass that, honeymoon stage of a relationship and life's getting busy, you go back to your own personal interests. If all those interests differ, when do you spend time together?
No, it's true. Common interest is a huge component. It's the Chris Rock joke. One can't go to church and the other one can't smoke crack.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're not going to spend time together. So you have to find activities. But through the process of building sustainability, common interest naturally will come.
Correct.
Like maybe there's some pushing and pulling and some counterbalance effort that you're taking more effort, but eventually it just becomes a standard and a norm in your life.
Totally. And the beauty in that common interest too is that it's going to improve relatability. It's going to improve reward. Again, each piece on the side of sustainability goes to support the desire for the relationship. So that's basically it in a nutshell. And this dinner conversation was what? An hour 15?
Hour 10.
Hour 10? Hey, that was an entire relationship framework fit into the space of a dinner. You know what? dinner with you would usually be 90 minutes. So I think we should continue on with a little bit of analogies and case studies. Glenn, why don't you take this model and framework and apply it to some of your clinical experiences?
So let me see. So I had one couple. Once again, they're both in a religious community, and they came together, but they're on the verge of divorce because they were constantly fighting. They were not getting along. And then once we broke everything down, one person, they were abandoned by their parent, and so they had a lot of abandonment issues. The other person was just in a very controlled environment, just being told what to do, so they didn't have any independence. And so when they got together, their trauma issues bonded them together, and then so they would always fight. That person, he was always looking for unconditional love. She was always looking for security that a partner wouldn't leave like the father left.
Mm-hmm.
So their core values was this trauma state, and they were just bickering and fighting at each other. But these were things that they could not resolve together. I mean, through each other. And then once they took accountability for that, which is the trauma components and all things that we talked about, then it became about what are their core values. And then this couple, once they started figuring out all their fights, one of the partners' core value was growth and trying to live a purposeful life. The other person was security, status, wealth. It sounds kind of superficial, but they wanted the best resources for their kids. And then that was why they were fighting all the time, because he was like, I want to grow as a person. I want to do more activity. She's like, why don't you just play golf and just kind of go with me here, because she liked the status of everything and how they were living.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to match their value sets, go through sustainability, match the core values, work out their attachment issues all at the same time. And they went from divorce to actually being really happy now.
Yeah, the interesting side is that at first glance, it can look like status and, this personal growth. Because I think there was a component in there too where, he had personal growth, but also like serving others, right? And she had wealth and status kind of on her side of like the security side. And at first you're like, those are contradicting values, but in reality, they're not. Because when two people when they can see past their own, this is the difficult side, is that if I have the values of status and wealth and you have the values of growth and service, right? We're going to look at each other through those lenses, and I'm going to say the things that you're doing are stupid. And you're going to say the things that I'm doing are dumb. So it's first breaking down that to realize like the positive side in your values and the positive side in my own. Because when you bring those two to the center, you could say, well, if I actually also valued status and wealth, well, how many more people would I be able to serve? And how much more could I grow having additional financial resources and a stronger network of people around me? And from the other person's side, status and wealth by themselves might feel kind of empty. The additional purpose and fulfillment can come from your partner's core values. And so when you start bringing these positive core values and merging them into the center and beginning this roadmap, that's why we start each coaching session begins with this roadmap. Then you can actually work towards this place where what I might have perceived was weaknesses or incorrect values or whatever it might be, then become kind of a beautiful synergy.
Yeah, and if you, I love that you brought that up, because it was seen as separate, but it was fused together through counterbalance effort to say, yeah, we can have all these resources. Let's be successful.
Yeah.
But let's also grow as human beings and be a beneficial presence to the community that we can serve.
Yeah.
So it all became one, and that became the common interests and the activities that they engaged in. So it went from divorce and fighting and not spending time with each other to actually, they're doing pretty well.
Yeah. So let's go through another example. I want to think of one example of specifically a military family. She wants to create more opportunities for quality time as a family, right? He wants to make sure that he's fit. Underlying values are ensuring that he's able to protect his unit, the people around him, right? The brothers and sisters in arms. He wants to make sure he's always fit. He's always a leader. He's always doing the things that he needs to be doing so that he can come home after each deployment. And on her side, it's like, well, we don't get enough family time because he's always working out or doing these things to support that, right? So we kind of just see him in between things, and it's not enough. Okay. Well, understanding their underlying values. Why is this time together so important? Well, for her, family is everything. This is the one unit. The family unit is the thing that should be unbreakable, the thing that you should be able to rely on. And it comes from her own background experience and growing up in a good and positive family and seeing all the other relationships around her come and go, but family has always been there. And his, again, going back to protecting his brothers and sisters in arms, making sure that he comes home at the end of the day. So then you can look at their relationship from their individual values and say, both these value sets are beautiful. We need to bring them towards the center. Now, when it comes to actually coaching and guiding, it changes the way that we can give advice. So, for example, we can give interests and provide opportunities for quality time and engagement by suggesting activities that tie into their own value sets. In this case, it was jiu-jitsu. Why not introduce your wife and your children to jiu-jitsu? At jiu-jitsu, you get to embrace the fitness aspect. You're working out, you're doing all those things, but then you also get to tie in this discipline and everything into your children.
And the family time all together.
She's getting the family time. He's getting the, I'm a better soldier and I'm a better leader from this. It tied into every single piece. Now, what happened from that one piece is then she goes on to really love jiu-jitsu. Relatability is improved, right? Because now they can talk about this. They find themselves at home, doing jiu-jitsu and wrestling. And this is like what they do on their living room floor. They have thick carpets that they can just roll around and wrestle on. And at the dinner table, they can talk about this and the kids start getting competitive into it. And now mom is learning nutrition and fitness because this is a way that she can help her husband, but also to kind of make the kids more healthy. And she gets really into it. And now the conversations revolve around, fitness and health and, what can we do to make you better at the job? And he comes home and the food that's being made now supplements what he needs, like nutritionally. And it's wild because you've taken the same exact relationship that was troubled, where both people were, having issues with that quality time. And now you've increased reward, increased relatability. You've improved risk by giving them something new to kind of embark on, a new experience. And it's a completely different environment than it was 1 year prior.
Yeah, and it's not superficial answers. Communicate better.
It's not, yes.
Be more understanding. Well, this is what they're doing. It's taking an action, through core values, and then changing the whole dynamic of that family.
Correct. Through understanding core values, we can then use clinical guidance to tailor it to actually things that are effective, as opposed to, like you said, surface level intervention.
Yeah.
Oh, when you fight, let's do this. Because that's what they were getting before. Oh, we would argue about this. Well, how do you guys argue about, family time? Well, she just says that she wants more of it and I feel like I'm doing as much as I can. But okay, so this is where you need to understand. And you need to come from her perspective and realize that this is important. That doesn't do anything.
Exactly. Because it's not addressing the core values.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're not giving them a solution based on those values.
And if you address both core values, the natural conversation and conflict will start to diminish.
Yeah. So our question, what does a healthy relationship look like? Well, it's a relationship where it begins with desire that feeds this quality time, meaningfully engaging activities. In doing so, the relationship is sustainable. The cost of maintaining this relationship is not so high that it's hurting your desire. And ideally, with the right pieces of sustainability intact, you're actually feeding desire and making you want the relationship even further, feeding that want for more time together and creating this loop. And it's a sense of balance, right?
Yeah. And it's simple and it's to the point, and it gets to the heart of the matters.
All right. So we've answered it. That's what a healthy relationship looks like. It's fun because in the last episode, we kind of dove into a specific story and case study, and we're going to be doing this throughout now. But now you can have kind of a reference of, what all these things are, at least until the book is released. And this stuff is core value focused therapy is trademarked. So please don't go stealing this and putting it into your own book. We will come after you. No, the book will be released. And you also are working on a new book, a new textbook. And I also want you to write a new book for the platform as well, which all of this stuff is really exciting.
Oh, very exciting. Yeah, I have a textbook coming out for the college. So it's going to be sponsored by Whittier. And it's going to be used throughout all the various classes.
That's rad.
Yeah, so I'm working on that as well.
Yeah. All good things. Hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Again, we do now offer one-on-one as well as couples counseling with Dr. Glenn, where he basically takes this entire framework, and in a 12-week period, you're going to become your own relationship experts. You're going to understand everything from the inside out. And at the end of the 12 weeks, you'll be able to self-diagnose, to understand what's going wrong, to understand how to fix it, all of that stuff. And should you want to continue, by all means, but that's the goal, is to not turn therapy into a subscription service. So we have that. You can sign up for a free 20-minute consultation on 12weekrelationships.com. We also have the relationship assessment there, a fun little quiz that you can use to kind of, evaluate any relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meantime, we'd love for you guys to subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to help us out, if you found this episode helpful, it's incredibly meaningful to us for you to go onto iTunes, to the podcast 12 Week Relationships, and to leave us a review. Positive one, ideally.
Please.
If it's a negative one, just put it in the comments on Instagram or YouTube, where all the other trolls are. We'd appreciate that. All right, guys. That's it for us.
Thank you.
See you guys.